Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Ricky Cartwright and I'm your administrator for today. So today's session is called Digital Simulation for On-Site Installation, and this is the third webinar in our series that we're doing as we count down to Digital Construction Week, which is taking place on the 17th and 18th of May. And we're planning to be there. We're going to be in attendance. We're excited to be there with our partners, Dassault Systems, who've got a stand number D562. If you want to come and visit us at all, we'd love to meet up with you and talk about the construction sector and the kind of work we've been doing there and what your challenges are in person. So for today's session, we've got two presenters for you. So if you've seen any of our previous webinars, you'll probably be familiar with James Brown, who's the head of digital manufacture at Prodtex. He's been involved in the previous two webinars. And they are available on replay if you want to catch up on them. If you miss them, you can get in touch with us and we can share the replay links for you. And then we've also got new to the webinar series, but not new to us, is Callum Ray, who's the digital manufacturing engineer at Prodtex. He's got a wealth of experience in the construction sector, delivering digital manufacturing solutions. So before we get started and I let these guys crack on with all the good content they've put together for you, I just wanted to mention that we are going to have a question and answer session at the end of the webinar. So if you have any questions during the course of the presentation, the material, just put them in the Q&A box that you should have access to, and then I'll collate them all and get through as many as we can before our time runs up at the end of the session. So that's pretty much it for me. So I think it's probably a good time to get started with the content that you all came to see. So I'll hand over to James and we'll get started if that's okay, James. Here we are. Let me give you full share and you should be able to share your screen now.
Cool. Thank you very much. Cool. I'll apologize for my husky voice today. So before we dive too deep into the webinar today, for those of you who don't know us and haven't seen any of these webinars before, so Prodtex is based in Northern Europe. We specialize in construction, infrastructure, aerospace, and automotive manufacturing. Our prime focus is DELMIA digital manufacturing, where we are a license provider, so you can buy this from us. We also train people in everything we're showing you. And we also offer expert consultancy, which you kind of get a flavor of throughout this webinar series, the sorts of stuff we do for the construction sector. We also work in both robotics and tooling design. I always like to mention this as it means we have first-hand experience actually doing a lot of the manufacturing stuff that you're trying to do as well. So we're not just using the software, we're kind of facing the same problems and challenges as within your business too. Cool. And next slide, if that's okay. Nice. And then, as Ricky said, this is the third webinar in the series. So if you've not seen the previous two, I'd please encourage you to check them out as well. They're really, really awesome. Today's session is going to be on the digital simulation for on-site. We've got a great lineup today that Cam's done really well putting together. And then we have 4 more webinars after this as well, which I'd encourage you to come and see too. Kind of following this similar story, so great. So before we deep dive too much into the main topic of the webinar, because I appreciate there's probably a few people on the call who've never heard of 3D Experience, never heard of DELMIA. So if you're completely new to it, what actually is it? So kind of my take on 3D Experience very briefly is it's all about bringing data together into a single place. So I'm talking about project plans, 3D, 2D, issues, changes, markups, whatever it is, all of this data into a single location. The second big thing with 3DX is bringing people together. So it's not just your technical CAD engineers, it's also project managers, sales, marketing, the off-site guys, as well as the on-site team. So it's bringing everyone together. And the third thing is it's giving these people the tools to use that data that they're now connected to. So there's a full suite of tools if it's design, manufacturing, PLM, like FEA, CFD simulation. This webinar series is going to be focused mainly on the DELMIA portion, which is obviously the manufacturing side. And the real thing, just to hone in on this again, is it's all about data. So the whole point of this thing is it's using data you have in people's heads and in the field, capturing that into your business, and then really using that to drive decisions within your business. Cool. So specifically, the good stuff, what we're actually going to talk to you about today in this session. So as I said, this one is on digital simulation for on-site modular installation. We've been given a challenge from, if any of you saw the last webinar of the factory designing this product, so we've been proposed a challenge to verify the on-site installation process and check that works for this single piece volumetric prefab unit. So we're going to break this down into a few different steps. The first, quite simple one, is defining the kits of parts that are going to arrive to site. So what are all of our prefab components they're going to turn up, and how do they turn up? The second is we're going to define the sequencing and the on-site processes for how that gets installed. And then we're going to look at simulating some of the repeat or really high-risk processes. We're going to consider the logistics into the site, which is something we do for most on-site processes. And then we're going to kind of conclude with some worker safety to make sure that this prefab product is safe to actually work on and operate in the field. Cool, so jumping straight in. So this one's pretty simple. If you've tuned into any of our other webinars, you've seen a nice deep dive on this already. This is what we call our manufacture bill of materials or construction bill of materials, or MBOM. So this is basically how we define make or buy. You can see for this on-site installation, it's very simple. We have our complete building, and we only have two things that we need to install: the foundations, and then we have a volumetric prefab unit, which is completely built in the factory, shipped to site in one hit, and then it's going to be installed in one hit. So this makes it really, really simple. But if this is a more complicated MBOM, which we will revisit a little bit later on, this is where you could do your make or buy decisions. Are we going to make that? Are we going to buy it? We can visualize what these kits are going to look like. So if it changes, it's really easy. If you're not sure what your kits are on site yet, you can click and drag and drop the 3D and redefine this very, very easily. Cool. So now we've defined our very simple manufactured bill of materials. What we now need to do is define the sequencing. So to do this, we jump into a process planning app, which consumes the manufactured bill of materials we've just created. So again, it's a very visual process. There's lots of tiles in there, and we can see the 3D building up as we order the sequencing. You can see even though there was only two steps in our MBOM, the foundations and the prefab unit, there's actually a lot more process steps behind installing that. And that's why we separate this out, is because there might be a lifting procedure which actually has 8 or 9 different process steps within it. So this is just a chance to really capture as much information we know about the process down into a digital library and a template. And this, going back to the first webinar, if you didn't catch that, is where now we have our standard product or our standard prefab component, which in this case, again, is the volumetric product. And this is the first step in us building the on-site library and template for sequencing. And we can take this as high level as we want. If we only know the very big steps of it arrives to site, it's going to get lifted into position, it's going to be installed, it's going to be checked. Or we can go super granular as well if we have that detail of install this bolt, install this nut, shim this area, if we know that sort of information. If not, that's okay, we can find that out through the stuff that Callum will show you in a moment too. So yeah, so that's the process. Cool, and then, so what this process is going to do is it's basically going to create a 4D buildup of just the kind of product on site just happening. So the foundations appear and then the building appears. So I always like to say to people is that's kind of being built by magic, or has happened by fairies. So this is actually just something I walked past this morning, a local building in Bristol. And I want to ask you what you see. So if we just click through these couple here, just to see all the blue. So typically when I ask construction firms what do they see, they'll see the physical stuff on it. This is going to be, it's a retrofit of a brownfield site. They're expanding the steel structure. We can see they're keeping the original concrete. and people will often pick out the stuff with the product, the building. If we go to the next slide, what we actually see as manufacturing engineers, and the big thing we try and push for people in construction to see, is actually there's much more to this than just the building. There's a mobile crane, there's articulated booms for access, there's street barriers that have had to go in, there's material buffers, there's access for the workers, there's safety railings. There's a whole plethora of resources and equipment that needs to be considered on this site. So this is where I'm going to hand over to Callum, who's going to show you how we take this amazing process stuff and then enrich it with this sort of detail. So over to you, Callum. Thank you for...
Perfect. No, thank you very much, James. So, just as James was saying there, you've got to look beyond the building and look at what is actually required. We know this in terms of DELMIA's resources. So, traditionally, that when you simulate it, these resources are there, they're present, but they're not active. They don't do anything. Your construction is done, as they say, by magic or pixie dust. But really, the detail from your resources is what's going to define that extra granularity of de-risking what's happening on site. So some of the resources that we can take into DELMIA is, as you can see in the background, there's a point cloud scan or open site map data. So instead of having to get somebody to work and manually create your site, you can pull it from live data, or if you've got a point cloud scanner, go out there and just get the real data. Lifting equipment, whether that's forklifts, whether that's cranes, whether that's buck hoist, there's kind of endless. They will also interact with your components, so you can, if you know how heavy your product's going to be, you know which crane, the minimum crane you're going to need to lift that. Site security and layouts, you saw in the video there, laying out security fencing, is that going to cause an issue for your logistics? Issues like that present really easily in DELMIA, and we can see them really quickly, but something that's not normally considered. Crew sizes and hand tools. If we've got sort of maybe our example here is just a simple prefab on site, but if you have something that's stick built, you have the area in which those parts are going to be laid out, plus you have the areas for the crew, plus you have the areas to store the hand tools. So that area for working gets bigger and bigger, and it's so much easier to visualize it when you have a simulation. So we have our resources. How does our resources now link to simulation? Well, in DELMIA, we directly consume them into the process. So we're going to take a look at a few scenarios now. So as you've seen from our previous webinar, or not, but I'd highly recommend you go back. From the factory, we had a single module come out, or one prefab unit. So, it's good. We have a much faster process. You have one truck appearing on site. You have one crane lift operation. Everything is done singularly. The issue is it's a larger unit. The access is not as good. We have width restrictions potentially on the logistics getting it to site. That's increasing costs. So scenario 2 is we split that prefab unit down into smaller modules. With some simplified access, simplified logistics, but your time on site is increased and your number of resources also increased. So let's look at them a bit more in detail. So module 1, the big single unit, you can see right at the bottom there, I think there's some 50-foot, 40-foot trailers. It doesn't fit on them very well at all. We've potentially got issues on site. We have issues getting it close to the build site. You can see that we've had to sort of park it to the side, the cranes within the fence, and actually that area that's not in the point cloud scan might not necessarily belong to us, so we can't lift over there. It is, however, quicker. So, that big one is faster to get it signed off, which means we get the payment quicker. But the logistics is a big issue here and so easily seen. And then scenario 2 is that modular one. So this will have to go back. The next webinar we'll look at this a bit more, but this will have to go back to the factory. But on site, splitting the modules into 3 units has a lot of benefits. We now don't have those width restrictions on those vehicles. We can get them into a bit of a tighter area. We are going to be get them to site easier because we're not going to have escort vehicles. In our simulation, we didn't use it, but because it's a smaller module, it's a smaller weight, and it's a smaller size, so we could potentially use a smaller lifting system, be that a smaller crane or a telehandler. But within DELMIA, we can quickly swap them out and see those simulations and see those gains. One of the big downsides, though, is we have an increased time on site. So we have a critical path now where because we're limited on our site space, we can only get one truck in at a time. We can only get one crane there, so we're having to wait, and that increases your time on site, which increases your cost because you've got to pay people for longer, and it extends time in which you're going to get paid. However, the cost savings from those difficult logistics options from scenario 1 with escort vehicles, you may find the scenario 2 might be better, and that's what the power of DELMIA here is. We can quickly adapt and we can quickly change them to see which scenario is going to be better. Just draw your eye to the bottom of that screen as well. You might recognize that that's actually the M-bomb that James was talking about earlier. So we're still talking about that one single point of truth. The modules were created in the same M-bomb. So we've not had to go and create everything again for this scenario. It's all still within the same tree structure within our software. And it's using the same resources that we assigned earlier that I was talking about. It's just the process is different. Oh, I do apologize. Remember, it's my first one, so I get a few mistakes. There we go. So, to summarize, we have two scenarios. We can go to our engineering team and pose them both. They're both going to have impacts on site and in the prefab factory. But just now we're only looking at the on-site. We can feed back that information to the factory. Scenario 1, was as we were saying, it was poor access, and it had a high and difficult logistic cost. Escort vehicles, potentially having to route other way around. If you've got a still factory that you can't move, you might have to take a longer route because there's some narrow roads. Scenario 2 looks better. We can also see that we also saw that we had to give the design team some feedback where we could split the main body of the prefab unit into modules quite easily. However, we discovered the roof was not designed to be split up, and that's something that the design team now need to take into consideration. Again, that's something you probably wouldn't have seen had we not used DELMIA and proved it out. But again, quickly identified that as an issue. And again, because we're using a single source of truth, once the design team changes that and informs us of the change, it'll be replicated all the way through our E-bomb, into our M-bomb, and into our process, so we can quickly see the change as it happens. And we're not having to sit and rebuild everything again just for a slight modification to the roof. Now, in fitting with Construction Safety Week, on-site worker safety, probably one of the best features. I'd argue. I quite enjoy using this as a feature of DELMIA. We can quickly analyze worker reach and access. So whether that be them reaching in for a fastener, whether that's unclipping the rope from the crane. You can see in the image there's a lot of people that have some dots on them. We can do postural score, or what's called the roulet analysis, rapid upper limb assessment, and we can quickly see if somebody is doing a single action, whether or not that's going to have a lasting effect on their body, or whether it's a recurring activity that over time they're going to incur some health issues. And that's a fantastic feature to quickly visualize if somebody's in a compromised position for an extended period of time. You can also see there that we can use external sources to manipulate people. So you can have real people in real time in suits conducting an activity, and that can be translated into DELMIA, and they can manipulate themselves and run the model in CATIA. So you're not having to just drag a hand in a software, you actually have a physical person manipulating themselves around it. And what benefit does this give you? Well, you can digitally evaluate and compare the reach. You can see our bottom image there, the poor sod is underneath, attaching some piping. You can de-risk activities as well, whether that's working at height, whether safety teams are happy with the proposed equipment that's going to be around them, the safety barriers. You can also, as part of the reach, you can visualize the blind spots and see whether somebody's actually going to be able to see the hole that they're going to be putting a fastener through, or whether they're going to have to feel for it. And lastly, we can do some virtual load center of gravity lifting analysis, whether that's a box that's been lifted up to some workers for them to use, and if it's weighted to one side, whether it needs to be lifted differently, if it needs to be hoisted differently, or a different strapping arrangement needs to be used. Potentially, you could even look if somebody has a single place to rest their tools because they need two hands, whether that tool's going to be there when they go and reach for it again. So, is a big thing in construction, especially with Construction Safety Week. On-site working safety is a really good tool. Next on to on-site work instructions. So traditionally, you might get like work cards or view cards, which has a lot of text and maybe not so much visuals. DELMIA work instructions combines that textual instructions with visual, and because it works with that single source of truth, it's reflected really quickly, especially any changes. So you can show workers those, if there's a blind spot they need to attach faster, you can show them in the work instructions. You can point out hazards. You can quite visually see which PPE is used. If there's multiple, you can see in the bottom one, there's some straps that are being pictured. If there's multiple straps available on site, if there's a specific one that's needed to be used for that loading, instead of having to go by a code name, they can verify the code and verify it visually. So you've almost got a two-factor authentication there as well with work instructions. And again, we keep rattling on about capturing. Digitally capturing process and digitally capturing the method in work instructions captures that knowledge and information in. So you don't lose it if people leave. You don't lose it if the experts move on. You have it captured and it can be referred to constantly. So in conclusion, on-site simulation, we've taken quite a quick trot through it, but it is an extremely powerful tool for the construction sector to de-risk, to evaluate, to pose questions, to look at what ifs before the first brick hits the site. It's not only cost saving, it's for safety measures, for access, so that issues aren't presented when the first truck turns up and you discover that it doesn't fit through the gate, or it can't quite make it to site because the roads are too narrow, or your crane's overkill so you can save yourself some money. We can go through lots of different what-if scenarios and evaluate them all to bring the risk and bring cost saving back to the customer. And it's all from a single point of truth. So there's no data change. That product that goes in there at the start is not modified throughout the whole thing, although you might see it be built up. That's the power of DELMIA. We're not editing the original data. It's just all simulation. And then through NBOM process, as James talking at the start, you open up the gateway to a number of other simulation options, whether that be you're going down the worker safety route, or you're going down the deep 4D analysis, or you want to create some work instructions from that. But I hope that's been a nice canter through on-site simulation, and I'm hoping there's lots of questions, because questions are good, means people are engaged. And I'm going to hand back to James now.
Thank you very much, Callum. That was awesome. Thank you. And I just want to touch on to your conclusions as well. One little point I wanted to add was that little accent suit that Callum showed before as well. Something we've seen in the field from customers right now is we spoke about in the first session about capturing traditional processes and traditional methods to compare your prefab products against. So that suit as well is one way to capture times against, for example, how would you install that walling system now versus the prefab simulation that Callum's done here. So it gives you, it's also a nice way to get some baseline information too. But yeah, no, that was a great session. I enjoyed it, at least. So I hope everyone else did. And as we said, if you enjoyed this session, we're actually going to take the feedback from Callum's on-site review. And this Friday, the 5th of May, we're going to give that feedback to a factory optimization engineer, Sofian, and he's going to have a look at how that impacts the factory. So before Ed showed the factory as a single product, we're going to see what Callum's split looks like for the factory and what that means and if it's even possible in the factory. And then after that, what we're going to do is we're going to move on from the volumetric product onto our walling system, where we'll then simulate a completely traditional on-site on-site stick-built wall on the 9th of May. So we'll show you how we've captured those processes and know-how there. We'll then look at, could we improve that traditional product with a micro factory and possibly try prefab a couple of elements of them on site. And then we'll finish off with re-simulating the new kind of prefabbed micro factory product back in the field to compare it to the traditional. And then, right, as Ricky said at the start, if you've absolutely loved these sessions and can't get enough of us, please come visit us as well at Digital Construction Week, 17th and 18th of May. And yeah, if you go to the next slide, please. Cool. And even further, if you have looked at this and thought, you know what, I just want to get my hands dirty, I want to give it a go and give it a shot. So we're also running a promotion right now where for 3 months, you can do a trial of 3D Experience in DELMIA and do everything we've shown you today for just £500. There's no commitment beyond that as well. We haven't put a commitment because we know once you've tried it, there'll be no going back. And once you start simulating people and cranes and things, you'll just love it. So yeah, if you're interested in that, please get in touch. And yeah, next slide. And yeah, and just to reiterate again, obviously we offer licensing training. So if you want to learn how to do everything you've seen today, you already have the software and you need some DELMIA expertise to learn how to do off-site prefab simulations or on-site prefab simulations, or you want to actually just buy the licenses to do all this stuff, please get in touch as well and we can help you with that. And I believe that is us for today. So yeah, thank you again for listening to today's session. We hope you enjoyed it, and yeah, guess we're open to questions. And back to you, Ricky.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you so much for that, James and Callum. Really good webinar, really interesting to see the good work you've been doing. So yep, now it's time for question and answer. So please put any that you've got into the question box, as challenging as possible. I want to try and stump James and Callum here today. So yeah, give us your best questions. Before we start with the first question, I just wanted to mention as well, obviously we've got our webinar series coming up, but as well as that, our partners Dassault Systems have a webinar tomorrow. I wanted to promote as well because I think it'll be really interesting for you guys. It's titled Harnessing the Power of Digital Twinning to Boost Construction Productivity, and that's tomorrow at 11 a.m. So I'm going to share the details for that in the chat as well. So if you want to sign up for that, have a look at it, see what you think. I think it'll probably be of interest for you guys. And yeah, onto the question session. So I've got a few here ready for you, but yeah, if anyone wants to add any more into the box, go for it. So this first one is basically, it's around the point clouds, Callum, and they're asking how easy is it to actually work with these point clouds? If they're particularly a heavy point cloud or a large area in the software, you know, how easy is it to work with that? I guess it, you know, concerns that it could slow down the software or take a long time to import or that kind of thing, right? So I don't know, James or Callum, who wants to take that one?
I can start. I generally, the point clouds, you will import them to start with, and you'll tidy them up, because there's a lot of data in there that maybe is not wanted or is sort of a little bit ambiguous as it's picking up stuff in the air. I personally haven't seen much performance issues in point cloud. It's something that's easily hidden and turned on if you are. So, you know, if you know your boundary area, you can use a point cloud to, say, create a 3D representation, work with that, and then when you really need to go into the detail, you can switch the point cloud back on. I think you've worked with a larger point cloud, James. I don't know if you've got any.
Yeah, exactly. I think generally computers and laptops are so powerful now that we've not seen huge performance issues. To bring them in is pretty quick as well. The only real thing you need to consider performance-wise is generally point clouds are huge files. They're like 50 to 100 gigabytes. So it's more the limitations on your own machine of do you have enough space to physically store that. So currently point cloud files are stored locally or on a drive on your computer, not imported directly to 3DX. So that's the only consideration you really need to make is, do you have enough storage somewhere to put it? And then beyond that, the use of it in DELMIA is pretty streamlined. It's all easy to use. To pick it up, it's um, half a day tops. It's pretty easy tools to learn how to manipulate as well. And yeah, huge value against it as well. So I think even in the simple point cloud we had in this session, that was outside of our offices here, and the criticality of it is when you turn it on, you can suddenly see actually there's an overhang on this building which wasn't clear in the 3D mock-up. No one considered that there's also a fuse box in that location. So by turning on the point cloud, you can suddenly unlock another layer of detail that sometimes gets missed in 2D layouts or 3D layouts as well. So yeah, worth having.
Yep, great, good answer. Thank you, guys. Another question I've got here is how long does it take to create these kind of simulations? So I presume they're talking about, like, with the cranes lifting the structure into place and looking at the different options there. So yeah, I don't know. I guess Callum, you put this together. How long do you think it takes generally to do something like this?
Assuming all your so you've got to know all your information, because if you don't know your crane yet, that's going to take time. But if we had everything, I'd say I could probably do the single module one a day or two if I really got the keyboard smoking, went that quick. It's rather intuitive, so once you understand the user interface and you know what each button does, it's a nice thing that you can do. We quite commonly will do sort of small bits with customers while they're talking, instead of it being a bit ambiguous and, oh, we don't know if it'd be this, we can quickly just, this is what would happen if the crane went that way, and they're like, ah, okay. So yeah, it's once you've got all the information, the key being the information, the data, it's relatively quick.
And the beauty is, in theory, it gets quicker every time, right? As well. So once we've captured like the specs of a crane or the specs of a telehandler or a scissor lift or whatever it is we're trying to simulate, once we've built the kinematics of that and everything, we put that into a library within 3D Experience DELMIA, which means if we need to use that piece of equipment again or a similar piece of equipment, if it's a similar piece of equipment, we already know how to set up like a scissor lift now. So the setup's going to be quicker and faster because there's a method logged for that. If it's directly using the same telehandler again or the same model of scissor lift or whatever it is, everything's pre-set up. So you've saved all of that workload straight off the bat the second you want to use it. So yeah, the first time is always slightly slower because there's setup, but it's the point of 3DX is you capture that data once and do it once. So
Great, fantastic, thanks, guys. And then I think we should probably make this the last question because we're running a little bit over time here. But if you have asked a question and it hasn't been answered yet, we'll follow up on email after the session, or if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us as well. But this last question is going back to the point clouds again, and it's basically asking what system configurations required if you're simulating using point cloud data, as it can become a very heavy simulation. So I guess this is talking more like hardware side of things with your PC or your laptop, right? So, I mean, I can quickly say I know there is a tool available that we could share with anyone who's interested in 3D Experience or using it that will basically evaluate the spec of your laptop or your PC and tell you what's in line with Dassault Systems' recommended configuration for using 3D Experience and what isn't. But the main thing normally is like the graphics card is having a very high graphics card is good. I think it's a tricky one with the point clouds. Obviously, there's things you can do if your laptop isn't as good, like you can split the point cloud up into smaller sections, or you can create like extracts from certain elements of the point cloud to lower the impact when you're doing your day-to-day simulation work, so you don't have the full point cloud on there. But it's we're probably not going to get into the exact specs of what laptop or PC would be great now, but we can certainly talk to you about that offline and discuss what would meet your requirements if there's something specific you want to go through. Do you guys have anything to add to that, or have I?
No, that's exactly it. And I think the only other thing to add is just if you want to actually do all the point cloud stuff we've done in the session today, get in touch, because it's actually a very simple license you need. It's something called plant layout. So it's quite a basic piece of software to use and import as well. So assuming your laptops are correct, as Ricky said. So
and I'm not sure if we already mentioned this, if you guys covered this in the session or not, but the point cloud on the screen there was actually captured just with James's iPhone. It's literally, there's an area in the building, and James went out with his iPhone and used the LiDAR scanner on that to capture it. And obviously, depending on what you want to use it for, there's much more expensive piece of equipment, or companies will come with that more expensive equipment to get you a much more detailed point cloud that's a higher accuracy. But if you're just looking for like a quick check, quick analysis as like your first pass, and you don't need a huge level of accuracy, you can get those point clouds with a relatively cheap piece of hardware like that, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, all right. Well, I think that's everything for today then. But thank you very much, everyone, for taking the time to join us for this webinar. I hope you enjoyed it. And thank you to James and Callum for putting it together for us. And we'll see you all hopefully at the next one on Friday.
Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.